My public school career began a handful of years before the videocassette became commonplace. And so my early experience with watching films in a classroom featured a member of the AV club rolling a cart with a projector on it into the room. Those projectors had a particular smell, cellulose and frayed vinyl and burnt dust, and they made a particular sound when they fired up. A second or two after that sound began, images would flash onto the screen, the first few featuring numbers, some of which counted you down into the film, and others of which served a purpose of which I've never learned. The numbers were accompanied by holes burnt into the film by misadventures gone by. And then the film itself began. Some of the films we saw were educational. Here's what it's like to work at a factory where they manufacture a certain kind of product. Here's what it's like to be an Olympic-level swimmer or diver. Here's what it might have been like to live in a cabin in the 18th century. As many or more of the films were whimsical or goofy. I remember a film that featured a bear chasing a bunch of people. I don't know anymore why the bear wanted to catch them. The bear wasn't especially angry or anything. And it included a scene in which the bear strapped on a pair of skis and followed its chases down a ski slope. It was after the film ended, however, that the part that my classmates and I really looked forward to began. We would beg our teacher to play the film that we had just watched backwards. Now, I don't know if you can watch videotape backwards. I imagine there's a button or an app that would let you play a YouTube or a TikTok video backwards. But with classroom projectors, it was easy. The teacher would just turn a switch and boom, reversal. Back at the factory, the product would get unmanufactured, so that the finished items were unsealed from boxes, workers undrilled holes into metal, and a saw took 2 pieces of wood and cut them into one. At the pool, the water started to boil, and then a diver went ballistic, shooting feet first, up, 30 feet into the air until they came to rest on a diving board. And the bear, wonders of wonders, the bear skied backwards up the ski slope. My classmates and I laughed hard. I'm not exactly sure why we found these backward movies so wonderful. I guess that we loved them because they broke all the rules of the world in a delightful and mischievous and freeing way. I guess we love them for the same reason that folks love Lewis Carroll and Gilbert and Sullivan. Here was a world of topsy-turvy, and like a lot of things that make us laugh, we sensed something holy about it. When I started reading the Bible, one of the many things that drew me to it was that this too was a place where I found holy reversal. Jesus is constantly telling stories and creating miracles in which the first are last and the last first, in which those who mourn are blessed, in which there is a divine undoing of what was done before. A particularly profound example of this reversal is to be found in Jesus' death and resurrection. In Jesus' passion, Peter denies Jesus 3 times, even though he's promised to follow Jesus no matter what. It's one of the most painful moments in Scripture. So what happens in the resurrection? What happens when Jesus and Peter meet on the beach? Jesus gives Peter 3 opportunities to say, I love you. In the resurrection, the film gets played backwards. Jesus is rooted in what we today call the Old Testament. For Jesus and his friends, the Old Testament, as we more or less know it today, is really the Bible in its entirety. The Old Testament is the well that waters Jesus' theological imagination. And so I guess it ought to be no surprise that holy reversal is found there too. Today, we hear from the book of Jeremiah. It's a book that we don't read from too often in church. Jeremiah these days gets far less time in the pulpit than his fellow prophet Isaiah. And maybe that's because Jeremiah is one of the most difficult books to read in all of Scripture. Scholars reckon that it was written over as long as a 200-year period. It contains this jumble of ideas. At times you have the sense that the pages that make up the book were accidentally knocked off of a table by a grad student and hastily and guiltily reassembled in random order. And many of the ideas in the book concern loss, self-doubt, and grief. Jeremiah centers around Israel's defeat by the Babylonian Empire, by this time in Israel's history in which Jerusalem was sieged and destroyed, and in which an enormous number of its citizens were sent into exile in Babylon. It is a time of massive society-wide trauma. And in the passage we hear today, God promises reversal. In words that maybe inspired the Sermon on the Mount, when Jesus promises that those who mourn are blessed, for they shall be comforted, God says, with weeping they shall come, and with consolations I will lead them back. So the weeping is reversed. To those who are exiled, God says, see, I'm going to bring them back from the lands of the north and gather them from the farthest places of the earth. The exile is reversed. And again, they shall come and sing aloud on the height of Zion, and they shall be radiant over the goodness of the Lord. The fear that maybe the people have been abandoned by God is reversed. Here's the thing about reversal, about the film being played backwards. It's something different than the things in the film never happening. There's still the work that goes on in the factory. There's still the pool and the diving board. There's still the bear on the skis. There's still the exile, the suffering, the grief. God doesn't make any of these things go away. What God does is to transform them. Remember the story in Luke of the bereft disciples meeting Jesus on the road to Emmaus. The two friends are gutted by what they've just witnessed in Jerusalem. And Jesus doesn't make anything that they've seen or endured vanish. What he does is something harder and more complicated and more beautiful. He explains what they have endured. He takes them back through it. Here's this reversal in a way that makes it new, in a way that invites the friends into resurrection. If you've ever heard me speak at a funeral, you've probably heard me say that the more I live, the less time that I have for the notion of closure. Closure being this strange modern idea that we can just seal grief away in a box or in a closet. It doesn't work. It's a lie. It never works. And so because we've heard about closure so much, we often feel confused and maybe even guilty that our own grief has not been sealed up and cannot be sealed up, that our grief is still with us day after day and year after year. We feel this way because closure was never possible. Our griefs don't go away like that. And God has never promised that our griefs will go away like that. What God has promised is that God will be with us in our grief, and that God will, in the fullness of time, transform our grief into resurrection. The grief, the presence of absence, the suffering, the unfairness, these things remain, and something new and holy abides there with them. How much grief and loss and loneliness and disappointment have we endured this past year? If 2020 were a movie, it would be kind of an awful one. One that gets 1 star out of 5, then one that would get destroyed on Rotten Tomatoes. And so as it ends, we say, please. Please, we all say to Jesus in the darkened classroom, please play this film backwards. After this year, we need your holy reversal. Thankfully, this is the sort of request to which the Son of God always says yes. And so listen, the old projector is sparking into life once more, and something new is beginning.